The storm raged outside, the wind howling through the trees as the rain pounded the roof, but inside, it was the tension between Alex and Karen that threatened to tear everything apart. Alex, a hardworking single parent, had lived in the neighborhood for years, keeping to themselves, respecting the rules, and trying to raise their daughter in peace. But Karen, the self-appointed head of the Homeowners Association, had other plans. She made it clear from the start that her word was law. With a sharp eye for every minor infraction, Karen had been watching Alex's every move, always finding something to criticize. That morning, the storm had been the perfect excuse. As the rain began to pour down in sheets, Karen stormed over to Alex's front door, demanding that Alex's daughter, Ella, stop playing outside, despite the girl being in the yard just minutes earlier, safely enjoying a game. "The rules are clear, Alex," Karen snapped, her voice sharp and authoritative. "No playing outside when the storm is this bad. You're endangering her safety." Ella, confused and terrified by the sudden confrontation, stood frozen in the doorway, her small frame trembling. Alex had tried to calm things down, pleading with Karen that they were simply letting Ella enjoy her last few minutes before the storm hit full force. But Karen, in her eyes, there was no room for compassion. There was only control. Ella, now visibly upset, stepped back into the house, but not before Karen took the opportunity to make a final remark. "I'll be keeping a close eye on this neighborhood, Alex. Don't think you're exempt from rules." With that, she turned and left, leaving a trail of dread behind. Alex stood there for a moment, watching as Karen disappeared down the wet street, wondering just how far the woman would go to assert her power. Ella, still shaken, clung to her parent. "Why does she always pick on us, Mom?" Alex didn't have an answer. This wasn't the first time Karen had imposed her rules where they didn't belong, but it was the first time it felt so personal. As Ella started to cry, Alex's heart clenched in frustration and helplessness. It was becoming impossible to avoid the realization that Karen's power in the neighborhood was growing, and if something wasn't done soon, it would tear their family apart. But why was Karen so determined to make their lives miserable? And what would Alex do to stop it? Alex had always been the type of person to keep to themselves. A single parent who moved into the neighborhood a few years ago, they had no interest in stirring up trouble. They were focused on providing a good life for their daughter, Ella, who was the center of their world. After working long hours at a local job, Alex found solace in their quiet home, a small but cozy two-story house at the edge of a neighborhood that prided itself on being close-knit and peaceful. The streets were lined with well-maintained lawns and houses that looked like they belonged in a magazine, orderly and safe. However, beneath the serene exterior of the community, there was a darker undercurrent, one controlled by people like Karen, the self-appointed ruler of the Homeowners Association, HOA. Karen had been living in the neighborhood long before Alex moved in. She was a woman in her mid-40s with a stern look and an air of authority that couldn't be ignored. Her presence was unavoidable, and her role in the HOA gave her an unshakable sense of power over the neighborhood. Karen saw herself as the guardian of order, and to her, order meant compliance, strict adherence to every rule, no matter how minor, and a complete disregard for personal circumstances. To the neighbors who had lived in the area for years, Karen was an undeniable force. She prided herself on maintaining the purity of the neighborhood, enforcing rules with a sharp tongue and an unforgiving attitude. Neighbors had learned to avoid her. Seldom did anyone dare question her authority for fear of receiving an unsolicited reprimand or a formal warning from the HOA. Most of the time, her actions went unnoticed or were seen as harmless, but for Alex, it was different. Alex had always felt a strange tension whenever they crossed paths with Karen. At first, it had seemed trivial, small complaints about Ella's bike being left in the front yard or a slight violation of the HOA's flower arrangements. But then Karen began to target Alex more directly. It wasn't just about following the rules anymore, it was about control. Karen didn't like the fact that Alex was a single parent raising a daughter alone. She found faults in the most mundane of things: the color of the front door, the type of mulch used in the garden, or the way Ella played outside. Every little thing became a reason for Karen to knock on their door and issue some kind of correction, with a smile that felt more like a thinly veiled threat than a neighborly gesture. Despite the growing tension, Alex tried to maintain composure. They didn't want to escalate the situation. They just wanted to raise their daughter, enjoy the quiet life they had worked hard to build, and get along with everyone in the neighborhood. But Karen's overbearing nature was pushing Alex to their breaking point. That afternoon, when Karen had stormed over to reprimand Ella for playing outside in the rain, something snapped. Alex had always prided themselves on being calm and understanding, but the constant interference from Karen was beginning to wear them down. Alex knew this couldn't go on forever. Something had to change. The worst part was that Karen wasn't just some random neighbor with a penchant for control. She was the face of the HOA, and with that came power. As Alex glanced around at the other neighbors, many of them nodded politely in Karen's direction, but rarely confronted her directly. It was clear most were too intimidated to speak up. The community had become a place where people like Karen thrived, using fear and intimidation to enforce an iron grip on everyone's lives. But Alex wasn't like the others. They weren't going to let Karen dictate their family's future, not anymore. As Ella wiped the tears from her cheeks, Alex promised themselves they'd put an end to this one way or another. They didn't care if it meant standing alone against Karen and the entire HOA. The storm outside had passed, but the real storm was just beginning. As the days went by, Karen's control over the neighborhood grew more pronounced. What had once seemed like harmless nitpicking quickly escalated into something much more sinister. It wasn't just about the minor infractions anymore. It was as if Karen was actively looking for reasons to undermine Alex and their family. No sooner had the storm passed than Karen began her usual rounds, making sure every blade of grass was perfectly trimmed, every fence in perfect condition, and every home in complete compliance with the HOA's rules. But for Alex, it became a game of constant surveillance. Karen started showing up almost daily, always finding some small issue to point out, whether it was the height of Ella's bicycle in the driveway or a single leaf out of place in the yard. At first, Alex had tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the absurdity of an overzealous neighbor. But it didn't stop. Every visit, Karen seemed to push further, inching her way into their personal life. It wasn't long before she was questioning everything: Alex's choice of flowers, the size of their front door mat, and even the arrangement of furniture visible through the living room windows. The once peaceful neighborhood now felt like a pressure cooker, with Karen slowly cranking up the heat. It was on a warm Thursday afternoon when Karen arrived yet again. She stood on Alex's front porch, her arms crossed, and her expression a mixture of disdain and authority. "Alex, I've noticed something," she began, her voice dripping with condescension. "I was walking by, and I saw Ella in the front yard playing with that ball again, the one that's been hitting the neighbor's fence." Alex felt their stomach tighten. This was the third time that weak Karen had mentioned the ball, and each time it was presented as if Alex had committed some grave offense. "She's just playing Karen," Alex replied, trying to remain calm. "It's not hurting anything." "That's what you think," Karen retorted, "but it's causing a nuisance. Mr. Brown mentioned it to me. He's not happy about the noise, and neither am I." Alex could feel the weight of Karen's words hanging in the air. The subtle threat was unmistakable. Karen was rallying neighbors against them. This wasn't about the ball, this was about power. Karen was testing how far she could push Alex, and it was working. Alex tried to explain that Ella was a child and needed space to play, but Karen wasn't listening. Instead, she doubled down. "I'm going to have to report this," she said, her voice growing colder. "The rules are the rules. We can't have children disturbing the peace." The sting of her words hit harder than the rain from a storm. Alex stood there, fuming but powerless, watching as Karen turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement with an air of finality. It felt like a slap in the face. This was no longer about rules, it was about control. Karen wasn't just trying to enforce the HOA guidelines, she was trying to destroy everything Alex had worked for. The next day, as if on cue, Karen was at it again. This time, it was a complaint about the grass. It's a little too long, don't you think? She said, standing on the sidewalk with her arms outstretched as if conducting an inspection. Alex had just mowed the lawn 2 days ago, but the arbitrary standard Karen was holding them to was becoming impossible to meet. I'll get to it as soon as I can, Alex responded, trying to maintain their composure. But it was clear that Karen wasn't going to let up. I'll report it if it's not fixed by the end of the week, she said coldly, then added with a smile. You wouldn't want to risk a fine, would you? The implication was clear. Karen had the power to impose fines, and she wasn't afraid to use it. The cycle continued. Each day brought a new complaint, a new reason for Karen to knock on Alex's door, always dressed in her best official attire, acting like a petty dictator. It wasn't just Alex who was suffering either. Neighbors who had once been friendly started distancing themselves. Mr. Brown, a quiet retiree who had lived next door for decades, suddenly stopped greeting Alex when they passed on the sidewalk. Sarah, a young mother who had always been kind, now avoided eye contact when walking her dog. Even Lisa, the neighbor across the street, had begun giving Alex pointed looks when they ran into each other. It was clear. Karen had made it her mission to divide the neighborhood, and it was working. Alex could feel the isolation setting in, the frustration building with each passing day. The worst part was that Alex couldn't figure out what to do. Karen had managed to make them feel like an outsider in their own home, and the more Alex resisted, the more Karen dug in. Ella had started to notice the tension, asking why they couldn't just make things right with Karen. But Alex knew that it wasn't that simple. This wasn't about doing things right, it was about the battle for control. Alex was trapped, frustrated, and desperate. Every complaint, every new rule, was just another weight on their shoulders. And each time Karen appeared at their door, Alex felt the walls closing in. The storm had picked up again, the wind howling louder than before, and the rain came down in sheets. Inside the house, Alex was sitting with Ella, trying to distract her from the tension outside. They had settled on the couch with a book, trying to make the most of a rainy afternoon, but it was difficult to ignore the growing unease in the air. Ella had always loved storms, fascinated by the sounds of thunder and the way the wind shook the trees. But today, something was different. Today, Karen had crossed a line. As the storm raged, Ella had gone outside to the small backyard, hoping to catch a glimpse of the wild weather. It was an innocent enough act, just a few minutes of watching the rain. But in the midst of the tempest, Karen had arrived, her face set in that familiar, disapproving scowl. Ella, what are you doing out here? Karen's voice was sharp and cold, cutting through the sound of the storm like a knife. Ella, caught off guard, turned to face Karen, her small figure shivering in the rain. I was just watching the storm, Mrs. Karen, she said softly, her voice barely audible above the wind. But Karen was having none of it. She pointed toward the house with an exaggerated sweep of her hand, her eyes narrowing with barely concealed disdain. You're not supposed to be out here in the rain. This is a violation of the neighborhood rules. You could be getting sick. Her voice had the same patronizing tone it always did when she spoke to Alex, as if everything about their life was wrong and needed correction. Ella's eyes filled with confusion and fear, but she didn't argue. She didn't know how to. What's wrong with watching the rain? Ella mumbled, looking down at the wet ground. But Karen's face only hardened further. She was the embodiment of authority, and to her, there were no exceptions. Ella, standing alone in the backyard, suddenly felt very small, her heart racing at the sternness in Karen's voice. Then, without any further warning, Karen stepped closer and, with an unexpected force, pushed Ella toward the gate that separated the yard from the rest of the street. Get inside, she snapped. You're causing trouble. Ella staggered back in shock, her arms flailing as she tried to regain her balance. The cold rain hit her skin like ice, but it wasn't the chill of the storm that made her shiver. It was the sting of Karen's cruel actions. She had never been treated like this, not by an adult, not by anyone in the neighborhood. With a burst of emotion, she stumbled toward the house, her eyes wet with a mixture of confusion and growing fear. Inside, Alex had heard the raised voices, their calm afternoon shattered by the confrontation. Before they could make it to the door, Ella burst through it, drenched, tears streaming down her face. Karen followed closely behind, her posture rigid with judgment. Ella? Alex rushed forward, wrapping their arms around their daughter. What happened? They could barely get the words out, their voice shaking with a mix of worry and anger. Ella buried her face in Alex's chest, her tiny shoulders trembling as she cried. Karen, standing in the doorway, seemed completely unfazed by the scene she had just caused. She was breaking the rules, Karen said coolly, as if she had simply done her duty. I had to send her inside. You know the rules, Alex. She turned, already walking away, but the bitterness in her voice lingered, echoing in the house. Alex stared after her, furious but helpless. Ella's sobs were louder now, and Alex couldn't stand to see her like this, vulnerable, hurt, and confused. Mom, why did she do that? Ella whimpered between sobs. I was just looking at the rain. I didn't do anything wrong. Alex felt their heart crack as they crouched down to Ella's level, wiping the wet hair out of her face. I know, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Karen, she's just trying to control everything, and sometimes she doesn't understand. But the words felt hollow, empty against the raw hurt in Ella's eyes. Before Alex could comfort her further, they turned toward the window. The storm was growing fiercer, and a feeling of dread washed over them. They knew this wasn't just about the rain or the rules anymore. It was about Karen asserting her power, trying to make Alex and their family feel small, feel powerless. The door slammed shut behind them, and Alex felt the weight of the storm, both outside and within their home. Karen had taken things too far this time. Ella wasn't just a child breaking some minor rule. She was a little girl trying to enjoy a moment of wonder, and Karen had stolen that from her. The air was thick with frustration and fear as Alex stared out into the storm. They knew, deep down, that they couldn't let Karen win. Not now, not after what had happened, but as Alex looked down at Ella, still trembling in their arms, a deep sense of helplessness settled over them. They wanted to fight back, to stand up to Karen. But how could they protect their daughter when the very rules of the neighborhood seemed stacked against them? With no answers, Alex hugged Ella tighter, promising in their heart that no matter what happened, they would find a way to make it right. The storm had reached its peak, the winds howling with an intensity that made the windows rattle, and the rain came down in sheets, blurring the world outside. Inside the house, Alex could hear the furious gusts of wind slamming against the walls, the storm's power echoing through the house. It was in the middle of this chaos that Ella rushed to the window, pressing her hands against the glass, her eyes wide with fascination at the fierce weather outside. Alex had warned her not to go outside, not with a storm this strong. But Ella couldn't resist. She was always drawn to the raw, untamed power of nature. She loved the thunder, the lightning, and the way the trees bent under the storm's force. But today, something was different. Something was about to break. As Alex turned away from the kitchen sink, the sound of the doorbell, ringing sharply through the house, caused their heart to race. It was only then that they remembered Karen, the woman who had taken it upon herself to patrol the neighborhood with a rigid, unforgiving eye. They had already endured one of her petty complaints earlier in the week, and Alex wasn't in the mood for another. But before they could make their way to the door, there was a loud knock. Karen's presence was always unavoidable. With a sigh, Alex walked toward the door, but before they could reach it, they heard Ella's voice rising in distress from the backyard. "Mom! Mom!" she screamed, and the sound of her cry cut through the noise of the storm like a knife. Panic surged in Alex's chest, and they rushed to the door, throwing it open. There, standing on the edge of the backyard, was Karen, her arms crossed and her face as hard as stone. Ella was crying, standing in the pouring rain, her clothes soaked, her face streaked with tears. "Ella, get inside now," Alex shouted, rushing toward their daughter. But Karen stepped forward, blocking their path. "You need to get control of your child, Alex," Karen said, her voice cutting through the wind, a coldness in her tone that sent a shiver down Alex's spine. "Rules are rules. She shouldn't be out in this weather." Karen, What the hell is wrong with you? Alex shouted, their voice rising in frustration and fear. She's a child. She's just standing there. She's not hurting anyone. But Karen wasn't listening. She stood firm, like a wall that couldn't be moved. Her eyes, cold and calculating, never wavered. Her playing out, "Here is a danger," Karen replied, her words as sharp as the wind itself. You don't get it, do you? This storm could cause damage. You should have brought her inside the moment it started. Alex's hands clenched into fists, their heart pounding in their chest. Every word out of Karen's mouth felt like another layer of control, another inch she was trying to take from their family. They wanted to grab Ella, pull her inside, and shield her from the storm. But Karen's presence blocked them. It wasn't just about the rain anymore, it was about power, and Karen wasn't going to back down. Karen, she's fine. Stop treating her like she's some kind of criminal. Alex's voice was shaking now, not just with anger, but with fear. Fear for Ella. Fear for how far Karen was willing to go. But Karen wasn't fazed. Her gaze flicked toward Ella, who was standing frozen, her face pale and tear-streaked. Ella, Alex called out again, trying to break through the fear and confusion in their daughter's eyes. Come inside, baby. Please. But Ella, still standing in the rain, didn't move. She was trembling, her small body shivering from the cold, but she couldn't bring herself to go against Karen. Not after everything that had happened. Karen had made her feel like she was wrong, like she was breaking some unspoken rule just by existing in the storm. Don't you dare make her feel like she's the problem. Alex's voice cracked, the emotion rising within them, the desperation growing as they reached out for Ella once more. But before they could take another step, Karen raised her hand, stopping them cold. Don't get any closer, Karen snapped, her voice low and threatening. You're just as bad as she is. Let her learn that actions have consequences. The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Alex's chest tightened with rage and disbelief. How could Karen, a woman who barely knew their family, be so cold? How could she stand there, blocking them from protecting their own daughter, all in the name of rules that didn't even make sense? But it was more than just Ella's safety now. It was the battle for control of their lives. Karen wanted to show Alex that she had the power to dictate even the most personal moments, and she was using Ella to do it. In that moment, Alex snapped. They pushed past Karen, their body trembling with fury and fear, and rushed to Ella. With one arm, they wrapped their daughter in a protective embrace, pulling her close and sheltering her from the storm. Ella clung to them, her sobs muffled against Alex's chest. You're okay now, Alex whispered, their voice soft but firm. We're going inside right now. As they turned to walk back toward the house, Karen called after them, her voice still carrying that same cold edge. You'll regret this, Alex. You've already broken the rules once again. But Alex didn't care anymore. The storm outside had nothing on the one brewing inside them. They weren't going to let Karen tear their family apart, not over something as trivial as this. They weren't going to let her win. The storm had passed, but the aftermath left a heavy, oppressive air hanging over the house. Alex sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the darkened sky, still processing what had just happened. Ella was in her room, quietly trying to recover from the ordeal, her face still pale from the shock of Karen's interference. Alex felt a storm brewing inside them, an anger that was more than just frustration with Karen. It was the realization that they had been letting someone else control their life for far too long. They had always felt powerless, like the rules of the neighborhood were set in stone, and there was no way to challenge them. But something about today, something about Karen's behavior, made Alex wonder if they had been wrong all along. It was while rummaging through old paperwork that Alex stumbled upon something unexpected. They had always been meticulous about keeping their personal documents organized, but today, something caught there, a legal document that seemed out of place. It was buried underneath a pile of HOA notices and outdated bills. Alex pulled it out, unfolded it, and gasped as they read through the contents. It was a document outlining the ownership structure of the Homeowners Association, detailing the distribution of shares among the members. As they scanned the pages, their heart began to race. There it was in black and white. Alex was listed as a major stakeholder in the HOA with a percentage of ownership far greater than they had ever imagined. In fact, Alex held more shares than Karen, making them the single largest shareholder in the neighborhood's HOA. The realization hit like a thunderclap, and for a moment, Alex couldn't breathe. They had always thought Karen was the one in charge, that her words were law, that she had control over everything. But now they knew the truth. Karen's power was built on a foundation of illusion. It wasn't her authority that ruled the neighborhood, it was Alex's. The implications were staggering. Alex had the power to make decisions, to change the rules, to dissolve Karen's influence entirely. They had the ability to turn the tables, to challenge Karen and the HOA's tyrannical grip on the neighborhood. Alex could even remove Karen from her position, and yet they had never realized it. For so long, they had felt trapped, cornered by a system they didn't understand. But now, the key to controlling everything lay right in front of them, hidden in the paperwork they had never thought to look at before. Alex sat back in their chair, stunned by the discovery. Their fingers trembled as they traced the names on the document, confirming that they, in fact, had more influence in the HOA than anyone else. It was a moment of revelation, a twist that changed everything. The balance of power had shifted in an instant, and for the first time, Alex felt a glimmer of hope. This was their chance to take back control, to stand up to Karen and prove that they weren't just another victim of the HOA's rules. They could rewrite the story, change the rules of the game, and put an end to the constant battle. But with this newfound power came a heavy responsibility. Alex knew that taking action would come with consequences. Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. She had always been ruthless, and now that she was faced with the reality that Alex held the upper hand, Karen would do everything in her power to maintain control. But Alex wasn't afraid. The storm outside had cleared, and with it, the fog that had clouded their judgment for so long. They were no longer the one cowering in the shadows, waiting for Karen to dictate their every move. Now, they were the one holding the cards, and it was time to play them. As Alex gathered their thoughts, a sense of clarity washed over them. They could no longer sit idly by, watching as Karen trampled over their family. It was time to act. But how? Alex didn't have all the answers yet, but the document in their hands was the first step toward a future where they were in control, not just of their own life, but of the neighborhood they had always called home. For the first time in a long while, Alex felt a sense of empowerment. The discovery of their stake in the HOA had shifted something deep within them, awakening a determination they hadn't known was there. They had a plan now, one that would change everything. Karen had no idea what was coming. Alex had the power to change the rules, and they weren't about to let that power slip away. The day after Alex's shocking discovery, a new wave of determination washed over them. Armed with the knowledge of their power within the HOA, they knew it was time to act. Karen's reign of control had been long and suffocating. But now, Alex held the cards. The first step was subtle. Alex knew they had to make their move carefully without alarming Karen or the rest of the neighborhood too soon. Alex began making small changes, adjusting neighborhood rules, calling for a neighborhood meeting, and even subtly enforcing guidelines that Karen had ignored or twisted to suit her purposes. But it wasn't just about changing rules, it was about changing the perception of power itself. As Alex made these moves, the reactions from the neighbors were immediate and varied. Some neighbors, like Mr. Brown, a quiet retiree who had always kept to himself, watched from a distance. Mr. Brown had been a silent observer of the neighborhood drama, never taking sides, but there was something about Karen's overbearing presence that he no longer could ignore. When Alex began speaking out, Mr. Brown saw a glimmer of hope. Sarah, a young mother with a toddler, also started paying attention. She had always found Karen's rules suffocating, but she'd been too afraid to speak up. Sarah had witnessed the way Karen tore into families like Alex's, but now, with Alex taking action, she saw an opportunity for change. Yet, not everyone was so quick to rally behind Alex. Lisa, who lived across the street, was a different story. She had been a loyal supporter of Karen for years, her allegiance driven by a fear of being ostracized by the community. Karen had always made it clear that those who opposed her would face consequences, and Lisa had learned to keep her head down. Lisa was hesitant to openly challenge Karen, but deep down, she felt the pressure to choose a side. As Alex made more moves, Lisa could see the cracks in Karen's authority. She was torn, unsure whether to support Alex or stay loyal to the woman who had been her neighbor for so long. Alex could feel the weight of this uncertainty, knowing that the community's reactions were unpredictable. Some saw Karen for the bully she truly was, while others feared the consequences of standing against her. Alex had to be strategic. They couldn't just bulldoze through the neighborhood with their newfound power. They had to build alliances carefully, one neighbor at a time. Every small victory in the HOA meetings, every shift in opinion, felt like a monumental step. But the challenge ahead was daunting. Alex couldn't help but wonder how far Karen would go to maintain control. She wouldn't let this go without a fight, and Alex knew they had to be ready for whatever came next. The real battle was just beginning. But for now, Alex was playing the game carefully, testing the waters, watching as the neighborhood began to shift around them. The power was changing hands, and the consequences of that shift were still unclear. Would the community rally behind Alex, or would they allow Karen to continue her reign of terror? Only time would tell. The air in the neighborhood was thick with tension as Alex prepared for the meeting that would change everything. 4 days now, they had been subtly working behind the scenes, quietly asserting their authority within the HOA, rallying the neighbors who were tired of Karen's oppressive grip on their lives. Slowly but surely, Alex had begun to shift the power dynamic, proving that they weren't going to back down anymore. Karen, however, was not someone who would relinquish control easily. She had spent years building her fortress of power, and the thought of Alex challenging her was an affront she couldn't tolerate. The day of the meeting arrived, and the neighborhood gathered in the community hall. Alex stood at the front, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The room was full of expectant faces. Some were eager for change, others still held on to the comfort of the status quo, and a few were simply there out of curiosity. But everyone knew this was no ordinary HOA meeting. Karen entered last, her presence commanding attention as she walked in with an air of superiority. She looked at Alex with cold, calculating eyes, fully aware of the challenge that had been issued to her. Alex could feel the anger radiating from her, but they weren't about to back down. The meeting began, and Alex wasted no time. They laid out the changes they wanted to implement, changes that would strip Karen of her unchallenged authority. They spoke about fairness, about transparency, about giving the neighbors a voice in the decisions that impacted their lives. No longer would rules be enforced arbitrarily, no longer would Karen be allowed to control everything with her iron fist. Alex was careful, methodical as they spoke. They had done their homework, researched the HOA's bylaws, and found the loopholes that Karen had used to manipulate the neighborhood. Karen was not pleased. As Alex continued, Karen shifted in her seat, her eyes narrowing. Finally, she couldn't hold back anymore. "You're making a mistake, Alex," she said, her voice laced with venom. "You think you've won some kind of battle, but you have no idea what you're dealing with. You think the neighbors will stand with you? You think they'll follow you instead of me?" Her words cut through the room, but Alex stood their ground. "I don't need to make them follow me, Karen. I'm just giving them the choice to stand with what's right. You've held this neighborhood in a vice for too long, and it's time for things to change." The words were out there now, hanging in the air like a challenge. The tension in the room was palpable, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. Karen rose from her seat, her posture rigid with anger. "You're playing a dangerous game, Alex," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You don't know what you're messing with. I built this HOA. I know how things work around here. You can't just come in and expect to change everything. People like you, people who think they know better, always cause chaos." Alex wasn't backing down. They had felt this building for so long, the frustration, the helplessness, the way Karen had made them feel small. But now, they had the truth, they had the power, and they weren't about to let Karen intimidate them anymore. I'm not trying to cause chaos, Karen. I'm trying to fix the chaos you've created. For too long, you've made this neighborhood a place of fear, a place where people are too scared to speak up. I'm changing that. The room fell silent, the weight of Alex's words settling over the group. Some of the neighbors were nodding, slowly but surely, others were still unsure. But Karen wasn't finished. She shot back with everything she had. You think they'll support you? After everything I've done for this community? You think they'll turn on me because of some nice speeches and promises of change? You don't know them like I do. They're loyal to me and they'll always be. The venom in her voice was palpable, but it only served to fuel Alex's resolve. They were done listening to Karen's lies, done letting her manipulate the people around them. This isn't about loyalty, Karen. It's about what's right. It's about doing what's best for everyone, not just for a few people who have been controlling everything from the shadows. There was a moment of silence. Then, one by one, the neighbors began to speak up. Mr. Brown was the first. I've been here for over 20 years, he said, his voice steady. I've seen how things have changed, how things have gone downhill. Alex is right. We've been living under a cloud of fear for too long. It's time for change. A ripple of agreement passed through the room. Then Sarah spoke, her voice a little shaky but growing in strength. I've been afraid to speak up, but I can't stay silent anymore. Karen, you've made us feel like we don't matter. But Alex is right. This neighborhood belongs to all of us, not just you. The room began to stir with murmurs of agreement, and Karen's face darkened. She could see the tide turning, but she wasn't ready to give up. You're all making a mistake, she said, her voice now full of desperation. You'll regret this. I've built this neighborhood. I've made it what it is. Without me, you're all going to be lost. Alex met her gaze, squarely, unflinching. No, Karen. Without you, we'll be free. With those words, the power struggle had reached its climax. The battle for control of the neighborhood was no longer just a matter of bylaws and rules. It was a fight for what kind of community they wanted to live in. And in that moment, it was clear Alex had won. The neighbors had spoken, and Karen's reign of terror was over. The day of the final confrontation arrived, and Alex could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The community hall, usually a place for casual discussions and procedural votes, had transformed into a battleground. The air was thick with anticipation. The neighbors had come, not just to attend a regular HOA meeting, but to witness something bigger, a battle for control. Karen stood near the front, her eyes sharp, her posture rigid, as if she were the queen of this little fiefdom and this meeting was her throne room. But Alex wasn't intimidated anymore. They had done their homework, found the loopholes, and gathered enough support to challenge Karen and her long-standing grip on the neighborhood. The meeting began with the usual formalities, but it was clear to everyone present that something was different this time. Alex was holding a stack of documents, their hands steady, but their heart racing with a mix of fear and excitement. The neighbors were watching, some curious, some apprehensive. Karen made a few half-hearted comments, trying to maintain control, but Alex could see the cracks in her armor. It was only a matter of time before everything would change. Finally, Alex stood up, their voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Thank you, everyone, for being here, they began, their voice firm but calm. Today, we're not just here to talk about minor infractions or landscaping issues. Today, we're here to discuss something much bigger, the future of this neighborhood. The room went quiet. Karen shot Alex a sharp glance, but Alex didn't back down. They knew this was their moment. For far too long, we've been living under a set of rules that were enforced arbitrarily, rules that only served one person's interests, Karen. For years, Karen has used her position in the HOA to manipulate the community, to control our lives, and to punish anyone who dares to challenge her. There were murmurs of agreement from the crowd, and Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She opened her mouth to speak, but Alex raised a hand to stop her. I'm not done yet, Alex continued, their voice growing stronger. For those of you who may not know, I've recently come across something that changes everything. Something that proves just how far Karen has gone to maintain her stranglehold on this community. With that, Alex dropped the documents onto the table. The room fell into an expectant silence as Alex began to explain. It's a legal document, one that shows I, in fact, hold the majority stake in the HOA. More shares than Karen ever did. Karen's face drained of color as the realization hit her like a freight train. I'm not just a member of this HOA, folks, Alex said, their voice echoing in the room. I am the largest shareholder in this neighborhood. The power that Karen has wielded over us, that she's made us believe she had, was never hers to begin with. Gasps rippled through the room, and Karen's attempts to speak were drowned out by the shock and disbelief on the neighbors' faces. Alex's voice grew more impassioned as they laid out the evidence of Karen's abuses, how she had used her position to impose unfair rules, punish dissent, and even manipulate other neighbors into supporting her in exchange for favors. Karen's facade was crumbling, and she knew it. She jumped to her feet, her face flushed with rage. "This is absurd," she spat, her voice shaking with anger. "You think they'll believe you? You think they'll turn against me? I've been the one keeping this place running. I've been the one looking out for this community." But Alex wasn't fazed. They had the truth on their side. "That's exactly what you've been doing, Karen, looking out for yourself. For years, you've controlled everything, manipulating the neighbors and making them afraid to speak up." The crowd was beginning to shift. Mr. Brown, who had been silent until now, stood up, his voice low but firm. "I've been here for over 20 years, Karen," he said, "and I've seen enough. I may have kept my head down all these years, but I'm not going to sit by and let you keep making life miserable for everyone else. Alex is right. You've been running this neighborhood like it's your personal kingdom." Sarah, who had always been hesitant to get involved, now spoke up as well. "I've been scared to say anything," she admitted, her voice trembling at first, but growing stronger with each word. "But I can't stand by anymore. We deserve better than this." The final blow came from Lisa, who, to everyone's surprise, stood and walked over to Alex. Karen looked at her, eyes wide with disbelief. "Lisa, you can't be serious," she exclaimed. "You've always been with me. We've been friends for years." But Lisa didn't back down. "No, Karen, I was loyal to you out of fear. Fear that you'd turn the neighborhood against me. Fear that I'd lose my place here. But I see now that what's right is more important than what's easy." The room erupted into applause, and Karen's face twisted with fury. She tried to regain control, but the damage had been done. The neighbors, emboldened by Alex's courage, had turned against her. Alex didn't let up, turning the full weight of the meeting onto Karen. "The truth is out, Karen. You've lost your hold on this neighborhood. You don't have the power you once did, and now it's time for this community to take back control." Karen stood there, seething with rage, but there was nothing she could do. The room was no longer hers to command. The neighbors, once too afraid to stand up to her, now stood united behind Alex, signaling the end of Karen's reign. The HOA was no longer a tool of control. It was a place for real community, for mutual respect, and for fairness. Karen had lost, and there was no coming back from it. As the meeting drew to a close, Alex stood tall, knowing that this was only the beginning of a new chapter. The neighborhood was theirs now, and they would make sure that it stayed that way. The room fell into an uneasy silence after the meeting ended, the weight of what had just transpired settling heavily over everyone present. Karen stood at the back of the room, her face pale, with a mixture of fury and disbelief, unable to fully process the magnitude of her defeat. Alex felt a rush of triumph, but it was tempered with a deep sense of responsibility. The power that had once been Karen's to wield was now Alex's. The neighborhood, this small, seemingly inconsequential piece of the world, was now in their hands. They had won, but the battle was far from over. Karen, however, was not going to give up so easily. Even as the neighbors began to leave the meeting, Chatting quietly amongst themselves, Karen lingered at the back of the room, her fists clenched at her sides. Alex could see the rage building inside her. She had been stripped of everything she thought she controlled, and that kind of loss was something she couldn't accept. As Alex turned to leave, Karen suddenly approached them, her voice low but laced with venom. "You think you've won, don't you?" she said, her tone bitter. "You think you can just take everything from me and walk away with a smile on your face?" Alex turned to face her, their jaw set. "I didn't take anything from you, Karen. You lost it yourself. You tried to control this neighborhood with fear, and now the people have spoken. They want change." Karen took a step forward, her voice trembling with rage. "You have no idea what you're doing. You don't understand the power I had. I was keeping this place in line, making sure it stayed in order. And now you're going to ruin everything." Her words dripped with accusation, but Alex wasn't fazed. They had heard it all before. "You weren't keeping order, Karen. You were keeping people in fear. This neighborhood will be better off without your manipulation." There was a pause, and for a moment, Karen seemed to shrink, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her own realization. The confidence that had once radiated from her was now replaced with something darker, regret, perhaps, or the first seeds of vulnerability. "You think they'll follow you?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "You think they'll listen to you just because you have the power now?" Alex took a step closer, their voice calm but unwavering. "They will follow the truth, Karen. They'll follow the people who have their best interests at heart, not someone who uses fear to control them. It's over." For the first time, Karen looked truly defeated. She had always prided herself on her control, on her ability to bend people to her will. But now, she stood there, realizing that her time had passed. She had spent so long building her empire, using manipulation and intimidation to hold everything together. And now it was crumbling. There was a sharp pain in her eyes, a flicker of understanding that all the power she had was just an illusion. Alex could see the walls around Karen start to break down. The tears she tried to hold back were now visible. But they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of anger, of frustration, of knowing that her reign had come to an end. Alex felt no satisfaction in seeing her this way. It wasn't about victory over a defeated foe. It was about the realization that Karen was, at her core, a person who had let power consume her. She had become so obsessed with control that she lost sight of the community she was supposed to be serving. Alex understood that, and in some way, they even felt a bit of pity. "This isn't the end for you, Karen," Alex said, their voice softer now. "You don't have to let this be the end. You can still be a part of this community, but only if you're willing to let go of the power and start respecting people for who they are, not what they can do for you." Karen didn't respond. She stood there in silence, her head bowed, as the realization that she was no longer in control fully settled in. The community had moved on without her. It was Alex who held the power now, and it was Alex who would shape the future. The weight of that responsibility hit Alex all at once, and for a brief moment, they questioned whether they were ready for it. The people of the neighborhood had placed their trust in them, and that trust would not be easy to uphold. Alex had always been someone who preferred to stay in the background to avoid conflict, but now they were at the forefront of a change that would reshape everything. They had the power to make decisions, to influence the direction of the community, and to ensure that it was a place where people could live without fear. And that was both empowering and daunting. But Alex didn't have time to dwell on their doubts. The battle was won, and now it was time to move forward. Karen had lost her grip on the neighborhood, but her defeat was only one chapter in the story. The real work was just beginning for Alex. They turned away from Karen, ready to face the future, knowing that they had the power to shape it. The battle for the neighborhood was over, but the fight for its future had only just begun. The days following Karen's defeat were a blur of activity, as Alex moved quickly to begin implementing the changes that had been promised during the meeting. There was a new sense of purpose in the neighborhood now, a sense of community that had been missing for so long under Karen's rule. Alex worked tirelessly organizing community meetings, reworking the HOA guidelines, and making sure that every voice was heard. The old conflicts that had plagued the neighborhood, minor disputes over fences, property lines, and rules that were enforced inconsistently, began to settle. Neighbors who had once feared speaking out against Karen now found themselves speaking up, offering suggestions, and getting involved in decisions that directly impacted their lives. For the first time in years, the HOA felt like a place of collaboration rather than a place of fear. Even Mr. Brown, the quiet retiree who had always kept to himself, found himself more engaged, offering his help with organizing neighborhood events. Sarah, who had once been unsure of how to get involved, became a voice for the younger families, advocating for parks and spaces where children could play without fear of being reprimanded for minor infractions. As the weeks passed, Alex could see the changes taking shape, both in the neighborhood and in the people around them. But even as the neighborhood began to settle into a new rhythm, there was a lingering unease that couldn't be ignored. Karen had been removed from her position, but her influence was not so easily erased. Her supporters, though fewer in number, still existed, and her legacy of control wasn't something that would disappear overnight. Some neighbors were hesitant, unsure if this new direction would truly last. The unease was palpable at times, as if everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. But Alex understood that change was never easy. They knew that the road ahead wouldn't be smooth, that there would be challenges to face, especially as the balance of power shifted. The truth was, Alex was just beginning to understand the weight of the responsibility they now carried. They had the support of many, but there were still those who weren't convinced, those who remembered the old ways and longed for the comfort of the status quo. Alex wasn't blind to this. The challenge ahead was to continue to build trust, to show the community that the changes they had fought for were real and sustainable. But Alex wasn't afraid. They had already fought the hardest battle, and they knew that the future of the neighborhood rested in their hands. As the sun began to set on another long day of meetings and discussions, Alex stood on their front porch, looking out at the neighborhood. The streets were quiet, but there was a sense of peace in the air. The storm had passed, both literally and figuratively, and what lay ahead was uncertain, but full of potential. There was still work to be done. There would always be challenges, always be people who resisted change. But for the first time, Alex felt a sense of ownership over the future of the community. The past had been marked by fear and manipulation, but the future would be different. It would be one of collaboration, respect, and fairness. As Alex turned back into the house, they knew that they had just begun a new chapter, not only for the neighborhood, but for themselves as well. The journey was far from over, but they were ready to face whatever came next. And for the first time in a long while, Alex felt hopeful about the future. The power they had claimed wasn't about control, it was about making the neighborhood a better place for everyone. And that, more than anything, was what mattered. The days since Karen's defeat had begun to settle into a rhythm, but for Alex, the sense of accomplishment was tempered by a quiet unease. The neighborhood was slowly healing, the wounds of Karen's reign of control beginning to close, but there was still a feeling in the air, a lingering tension, like the calm before another storm. Alex had seen the change. The streets were quieter now, the once oppressive air of fear replaced by a new sense of hope and possibility. The neighbors, though still cautious, were beginning to come together. Mr. Brown had started attending the neighborhood meetings regularly, offering advice on maintaining the neighborhood's shared spaces. Sarah was helping organize playdates for the children, and even Lisa, once so loyal to Karen, had begun reaching out to others, trying to make amends for her silence in the past. But despite these positive changes, there was still an undercurrent of suspicion. Karen's supporters, though diminished, hadn't completely disappeared. The seeds of doubt still lingered in some corners of a neighborhood. Alex knew that not everyone was fully on board with the new direction, and that the real work, maintaining the fragile peace, had just begun. The past few weeks had been filled with meetings, discussions, and changes, but Alex couldn't shake the feeling that the quiet wasn't going to last forever. As they stood in their front yard, watching the sun dip behind the horizon, Alex couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. It felt like a lifetime ago when Karen had first knocked on their door, criticizing them for something as small as a misplaced flower pot. It had been the beginning of a journey that had shaken the very foundation of the neighborhood. The fight had been long, and at times it had felt impossible. But now, as they looked around at the new life taking root in the community, Alex couldn't deny the sense of pride they felt. They had done it. They had taken back control, but there was still work to be done. The peace they had fought for wasn't guaranteed. Karen was still out there, her pride wounded and her influence fractured, but not entirely gone. Alex knew that the battle had only been won, not ended. As the sun set, the shadows of the neighborhood stretched long across the quiet streets. Alex could almost feel Karen's presence lurking in the background, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The power shift in the community wasn't just a shift in leadership, it was a shift in how the neighborhood saw itself. It was a new chapter, one full of promise, but also full of uncertainty. Alex glanced over at their daughter, Ella, who was playing in the yard, blissfully unaware of the weight of what had transpired. Ella was happy again, safe from the storm that had once threatened to tear their world apart. But for Alex, the storm wasn't over. Karen's defeat may have been a victory, but the lingering tension in the air suggested that a new storm was on the horizon, one that would challenge everything Alex had worked for. As they turned to go inside, Alex took a deep breath, knowing that the neighborhood was on the verge of something new, something better, but also something uncertain. The future was wide open, and they had no idea what would come next. The camera lingered on Alex for a moment, the weight of their responsibility clear in their eyes, before pulling away to show the quiet streets, the shadows growing longer as night began to fall. The story wasn't over. Not yet. The neighborhood was changing, but so was Alex, and only time would tell how far they could take it. The screen faded to black, leaving the audience with the sense that the fight for this community's future was far from finished. The battle for control in your community may be over, but the journey to building a better, more united neighborhood is just beginning. Stand with Alex and every person who believes in fairness, collaboration, and taking back power from those who misuse it. Join the movement, and let's create spaces where everyone's voice matters. The time to act is now. Together, we can build the future we all deserve.